The anime begins with an elderly couple taking care of their apple orchard. Then Shouzou Saitou apologizes to his wife, Ine Saitou, for not having the honeymoon they wanted due to lack of money at the time. But Ine says there's no need to worry because she's happy with the life they had. Ine remembers the apple tree they planted when they got married about 60 years ago was nearby. Shouzou recalls the tree was broken in half by a typhoon and finds it, identifying the patch he made on it. They admire nature when Ine notices a golden apple on the tree, which surprises the couple. Later, the couple returns home while Shouzou regrets not giving his wife a better life due to his condition when he was young, noting that she stayed with him despite probably having many things she would have liked to do. Shouzou cries in the bathroom thinking about this when suddenly he looks in the mirror and realizes that for some mysterious reason, he had become young again. Startled, he rushes to Ine and discovers she is also rejuvenated. The old man then gets excited about having a honeymoon with his wife. The next day, the couple's granddaughter, Mino, comes to visit and is surprised to see her grandparents so young. However, after the surprise wears off, the girl is enchanted by her handsome grandfather and sticks to him. Later, Mino's father, Yoshiaki, takes her home and the girl tells him that her grandparents have become young again, but he takes it as a joke from his daughter. In the park, some neighbors reflect on missing the Saitou couple who weren't visiting as often due to age and health. But now that the two have rejuvenated, Shouzou is a hit with the elderly ladies in the neighborhood, while Ine also catches the attention of the elderly men. In the past, Yoshiaki asked his parents to come live with him because the couple's age was advancing and the son was worried about them living alone. But Shouzou refused to leave their land, which has been in the family for generations. While Yoshiaki tried to convince the old man to move, Ine washed dishes with her daughter-in-law, Keed, Yoshiaki's wife, who decides to ask what her mother-in-law would like as she hadn't yet expressed her desires. But Ine said it didn't matter to her. As long as she could be with her husband, anything would do. In the present, Cade visits her in-laws to drop off some ingredients that Ine had requested. However, she is surprised to find Shouzou looking super young. He explains that his wife went to a community center meeting, acting calmly because he thought his granddaughter had already told her the news. But upon seeing Cade's shock, Shouzou apologizes for acting so naturally. Completely surprised, Cade asks to use the bathroom, where she processes what she had just seen and is surprised to find out she has a handsome father-in-law. Later, Cade calls her husband, who goes there with Mino. Yoshiaki is surprised to see his parents and realizes that Mino was telling the truth about them becoming young again. Then he questions Cade for not telling him the news as soon as she found out, but she explains that she thought it was better to tell him in person. At that moment, everyone notices Mino clinging to her grandfather and Cade scolds the girl while Shouzou makes it clear that he only has eyes for Ine, comforting his wife, while Yoshiaki is speechless at the scene. But Ine doesn't like seeing someone on top of her husband and reprimands him with a slap on the face. After the confusion, Yoshiaki, his wife and daughter say goodbye to go back home because he has to go to work. Then Ine worries about her son working too hard and pets him, which makes the man remember when he was a child and she praised him for his hard work in the same way. Mino also feels like getting some head patting and Ine grants her granddaughter's wish. Later, the elderly in the neighborhood are worried about the annual sports festival, because since the school in Manamamachi closed due to another school opening in Kitamachi, there are no more children living in the area, and the population is getting older, making it difficult for them to win the festival, not to mention the fear of someone having a heart attack during the event, which resulted in Kitamachi winning every year. The elderly of Manamamachi, unable to see hope, consider giving up, until they see Shouzou and his new muscles as the light at the end of the tunnel even bow to the guy. Then they ask Shouzou to participate in the festival with them, making it clear that they won't accept no for an answer, and he complains about being deceived because he went there thinking it was a community center meeting. On the day of the sports festival, the head of the neighborhood council of Kitamachi, named Haisuke Igarashi, appears to taunt his opponents, saying he heard that Manamamechi might not participate in the festival that year, since all the participants are over 50 years old. He then shows off his young grandsons to the elderly. One of them is the star of the school's soccer team named Shouta Igarashi, and the other is the captain of the school's baseball team named Daiki Igarashi. The three laugh at the idea of competing with a bunch of old people, acting as if victory is guaranteed. Then the leader of the Manamamaki Neighborhood Association, an old man named Sano, warns that this year they have prepared a triumphant weapon, the Saitou couple. Haisuke, who knows the two, acts as if Sano had told a joke until the couple appears completely rejuvenated and leaves the old man and his two grandsons speechless. Haisuke even thinks those are Saitou's grandchildren, but Shouzou explains that they themselves have become young. And so the festival begins with a tug-of-war where both teams make their utmost effort to win until a lady convinces Ine to be the Manamamechi's cheerleader. As soon as she starts cheering, both Shouzou and his companions increase their willpower, leading them to their first victory. Ine feels a little embarrassed for having been a cheerleader at her age, but she's intrigued to discover that her husband enjoys such things. Next, the relay race moves on to the three-legged race, where everyone runs in pairs with their feet tied together to the finish line. Shouzou and Daiki strive to make up for their loss in the tug-of-war, while Hazuki is hopeful for victory, as the two brothers have been practicing sports together for over 10 years and know each other's quirks and rhythms better than any other pair. At this moment, an elderly couple from Minamimachi finally completes the course, apologizing for being more than halfway behind, making way for the Saitou couple to enter the action. Then Shouzou and Daiki find themselves close to the finish line and think victory is theirs when suddenly Ine and Shouzou approach them and then easily pass by. The couple literally runs in a way that doesn't even seem like their feet are tied together after all. They've been together for almost 70 years and Shouzou knows his wife's rhythm well, adjusting his speed to synchronize with hers. And so the Saitou couple wins the three-legged race just like all the other games in the relay, leading Minamimachi to victory, leaving Haisuke and his grandsons frustrated. Shouzou and Daiki reflect that competing isn't as easy as they thought, while Hazuki is furious that Shouzou stole Ine from him in the past and now stole his grandchildren's smiles. He then tries to console the two when Ine appears to apologize for getting so carried away in the games. Hazuki asks if she shouldn't be with her husband, and Ine explains that it's not possible because Shouzou became super popular after winning the relay and is surrounded by people. Ine then shows that she brought a meal for everyone to share and offers it to Hazuki and his grandsons. And so they eat together while remembering that it's been 3 years since Hazuki lost his wife. Then Ine comments that Shouzou and Daiki resemble their grandfather when he was younger, which reminds her of when Hazuki confessed his love to her, and the grandsons are shocked to discover their grandfather's interest in Ine and realize that's why he caused a rift with Shouzou. Then Ine tells the two not to lament their loss and to strive to come back stronger in the multisport relay the following year, which makes the boys admire her and think it's no wonder their grandfather couldn't win her over, leaving Hazuki furious. A week after the relay, Hazuki sends Shouzou to deliver something to the Saitou couple's house to thank Ine for what she did that day. The boy goes there and is greeted by Mino. Shouzou feels awkward seeing her, who thanks him for the delivery and invites him in. The boy agrees to enter the house but feels nervous being alone with her because his family had gone out shopping. They both studied in the same class, and Mino is the popular girl at school while he struggles to socialize, leaving him completely awkward and unsure how to act around her. So to pass the time, Shouzou decides to fiddle with his phone, but Mino approaches him to see what he's playing, making him even more anxious. At that moment, Kate arrives with her in-laws and stands at the door not knowing what to do. Kate panics at seeing her daughter alone with a boy while Shouzou is at a loss for how to interrupt their conversation. Later, the three enter the house and discover why Shouzou went there. Shouzou is super friendly and kind to the boy, but Ine and Kate already make him worried and feeling as if he's in a parent-teacher meeting. So to start a conversation, Shouzou asks his granddaughter if they're in the same class. Mino confirms and says that Shouzou is smart and good at sports, causing Cade to whisper about it with Ine, thinking he's a good boy for her daughter. Seeing the two whispering, Shouzou decides to step in and starts asking Shouzou if he likes any girl, but Ine stops him from interfering like that. Then Shouzou says goodbye to the family and Mino tells him to come back whenever he wants. Then Kid and Ine find it amusing how the two bid each other farewell so formally, meaning they weren't even proper friends. However, when the boy leaves, Mino ends up regretting for herself that Shouzou left, quietly wishing she could have talked to him alone for longer. Shouzou overhears his granddaughter's comment, but decides to keep this fact a secret. Meanwhile, Shouzou asks his grandfather to send him to do something at the Saitou's house, so he has an excuse to go back there again. The next day, Mino talks to her grandparents and learns that Ine confessed to Shouzou first. He explains that at the time, despite being happy to receive the confession since he had always been interested in Ine, he told her that it wouldn't be possible for them to be together because at that time it was very difficult for people to marry for love, and his father, Mino's great-grandfather, was very conservative and intended to marry him off to a friend's daughter. Mino finds it awful that Shouzou wasn't free to choose who he would marry, and Ine says that at that time, a person's family influenced others. Then the girl asks what her grandfather did, and he replies that he ended up getting into a fight with his father, and for a while he even considered running away with Ine. But she managed to solve their problem beforehand. Shouzou says his wife was incredible at the time and called the girl, who was going to have an arranged marriage with him, to say she wouldn't let her have her love. Mino is proud of her grandmother, and she says that apparently the girl already liked someone and only accepted giving up the marriage. Then Mino pleads with her grandmother to pretend she's the girl and represent what she said at the time. Ine feels embarrassed but notices her husband looking at her with anticipation and decides to make this effort for him and her granddaughter, who are filled with pride at seeing the enactment. Walking in an apple orchard, a pair of young boys conclude that this farm business is for old folks and young people like them should head to the city, maybe even move to Tokyo, and make some cash. One of the boys believes he can quickly find a girlfriend in a big city, and speaking of which, they spot a beautiful young woman instead of the elderly couple who take care of this orchard. The girl notices the boys looking at her and says good afternoon, making the duo run away in embarrassment. A little farther away, they think she's the daughter or granddaughter of the elderly couple, until the woman's husband arrives and she calls him dear old man, leaving the boys even more confused. When he arrives with his truck full of apples, the man asks the boys to be careful on their way home and leaves with the beautiful woman as if nothing had happened. So the boys change their minds and decide they'll be farmers when they grow up. Flashback to the past, when the couple was still elderly, Ine asks to throw away some flyers and her husband agrees. However, upon seeing a dress on sale for 3,000 yen, the woman changes her mind and takes the flyer along to prepare dinner. The next day, young Ine asks young Shouzou if he went anywhere today. The man replies that he just took a light walk, so his wife is confused to see a package on the ground. Upon opening it, she sees it's the dress she wanted so much, and assuming her husband bought it, she reciprocates with affection, but Shouzou sees that he's been caught. Later, they silently prepare dinner together, and then watch a romantic movie at Mino's request. And in this movie, Shouzou notices that today's youth are watching some extreme stuff, in his opinion. For him, even if there's no more kissing between him and his wife, it's much more important that they understand each other so well. Ine seems not to agree so much with her husband as she's paying attention to the kissing scene. When Shouzou draws her attention to this, Ine sees no other option but to ask him for something. Soon Shouzou accepts his beloved's request and the two reenact the kiss they just saw in the movie. Despite their efforts, Ine can't feel the expected effect after all. They've been together for 50 years, and they're no longer teenage lovers. With that, the man already assumes the stance of I told you so, because according to him, that's something for young people. Ine agrees on the surface, but inside, she's sweating. In the late afternoon, an old friend of the couple arrives at their house and asks Mino if they're home because she brought mountain asparagus and other gifts. As the lady had an extremely strong accent, the young woman couldn't understand a word of what she was saying. To save the situation, Ine appears celebrating the arrival of Mrs. Kakya from the fish market. Kakya doesn't understand what's going on, so she asks her friend why all the fuss. Ine replies that she just got a little younger, so the lady assesses Mino to notice that she's really the same age as her dear grandson, so she offers him to the girl. Then Ine hugs the girl and says she won't let her marry yet, but Mino would love it if it were with her grandfather. Later, the daughter of the couple's second son, Takahiro, fought with her father and ran away to her grandmother's house. Even though she's happy to have somewhere to spend the night, young Shiori doesn't understand how the old lady got so young like this. Ine offers something for the girl to eat, but she's sulking and refuses because the bullying she's been facing has impacted her psyche a lot. Shiori is the classic school nerd, and besides being teased for it, at home her father acts as if she has to meet his expectations, forcing the girl to study medicine. Therefore, the girl thinks she's lost everything tonight: her desire to study, her future prospects, and her own father. However, Ine argues that just the fact that the girl is crying is proof that she cares and keeps fighting. When she was a child, Shiori said she wanted to be a doctor to cure all the diseases in the world, and even though she's changed her mind today, Shiori has never stopped being a beloved granddaughter. Hearing this, the girl bursts into tears and enjoys her grandmother's hug, besides asking to have dinner with her. In another flashback from the past, Ine apologizes to her husband for not being able to travel on vacation because she got sick, but the man is understanding and puts his wife's health first. Ine encourages him to take little Yoshiaki for a walk on the beach, but Shouzou thinks it's not the same without his wife by his side. Ine jokes that the guy is eager to see her in a bikini, so he teases that he also wants to make other guys at the beach jealous. Back to the present, Ine thinks that young people are really showing off their bodies too much everywhere lately, while she wonders what kind of bikini would make Shouzou happy to see her wearing. She knows he's a pervert, but maybe walking around in a short bikini is too much for her. Therefore, she decides to wear the white dress she received the other day. Peeking into her grandmother's dilemma, Shiori advises her to be more daring and show off that beautiful body God gave her for the world to see. Ine reminds the girl that she's old inside, but Shiori doesn't see anything wrong with her grandmother showing off a bit for her husband. Finally, Ine decides to think about it while making dinner, so Shiori tells her grandfather that the woman left and says he's hopeless because everything was a plan to convince Ine to wear a short bikini. Suddenly, the phone rings and Ine answers asking if it's Yoshiaki. On the other end, the guy confirms it is, but since his voice doesn't sound like much, he says he caught a cold that messed up his throat. Suspicious, The woman decides to record the call, while the man on the line says that Ine's voice sounds younger. After that, getting straight to the point, the supposed Yoshiaki says that an unexpected situation arose and that's why he needs 200,000 yen. So she writes down the code for the bank transfer, but before calling, she tells the guy on the other line that she's not his real mother, but if he needs to talk to someone, just call. With that, the man hangs up immediately. The next day, the guy who tried to scam Ine ended up getting arrested. Watching the news on TV, Shouzou asks his wife to stay alert, but she knows well that after 6 p.m., the phone line turns into a free-for-all. Later that day, Ine discovers that she no longer needs to wear her glasses because her eye has rejuvenated so much that she can see things even the young Mino can't. With a hidden agenda, Mino asks if Grandma can read what's written in the newspaper, and as soon as she repeats the article shown, Shouzou appears on the scene. So the girl challenges her grandma to read the words she points to, and reading one by one, Ine completes the sentence. "Darling, you are charming." And Mino uses that to say that the old lady is shamelessly flirting with Grandpa. 5 minutes later, the couple was forcing the granddaughter to complete the sentence, "I like someone, and that person is." But before completing it, Mino tries to escape the embarrassment, and even Grandpa feels sorry for the girl. Sometime later, Mino is watching another romantic movie when she asks Grandma if she ever held hands with Grandpa. Ine replies no, because doing so is equivalent to shouting in the street that you're dating. As for Shouzou, when you get old, holding hands is to help each other not to fall flat, and hearing these things, Mino comments on the lack of romance between the couple. Later, returning from the neighborhood stores, the couple feels happy to have gotten some Chinese cabbage. Since the weather is cold, Shouzou notices that his wife is not wearing a glove on her right hand, and inside, the woman is eager for her husband to notice. However, if he holds her hand, Shouzou thinks he's giving in to the granddaughter, and he doesn't want to give the brat the satisfaction. Ine tries to drop some hints to her husband about being cold, but the man dodges them all. Suddenly, Ine looks at his hand, and with her heart pounding, she gathers the courage to hold hands with her man. Sometime later, they tell the story of how they became younger to their second son, Takahiro. The man doesn't know how, but he's sure those are his parents looking young, so he asks how they feel. And they both say they're great and full of life. Examining the strange situation, Takahiro sees that his mother's breathing has become steadier than before, and her pulse has slowed down. This convinces the son that his parents have become younger, so later he promises to deliver the results when they're ready. However, Ine's examination reveals that she has liver cancer, and since she just recovered from gastroenteritis, they recommend that she undergo blood tests and a tomography, and based on the results, treatment will be initiated. Upon receiving this news, Takahiro remembers that he became a doctor to save his mother, but in the end, all he did was introduce a good doctor to her. Watching her get weaker every day, Takahiro wondered what he could do. Even though he hadn't done anything directly, somehow he feels rewarded for everything he's done so far, and that's why he cries, remembering when he promised his mother he would be a doctor. In the past, as their children grew up, Shouzou and Ine's love for the farm and their way of life grew as well, and everything seemed to be going in a great direction. It was sudden when the typhoon came and broke the apple tree in half. The couple did everything they could to keep it from dying, and over the years, leaving every drop of sweat in the maintenance of that tree, one day the golden apple appeared on its dry branches. As Shouzou cuts the apple, he would love to place that beautiful shiny piece on his Shinto altar, but Ine thinks that would be the same as letting it rot for free. Moreover, its appearance is very eye-catching, almost an invitation to be eaten. That said, the two finally share the fruit. Meanwhile, the apple tree, thankful for the treatment it received, finally disappears in a mystical way. After eating the apple, Ine wakes up in a completely strange environment until she comes face to face with a gigantic hourglass. Floating in the air, the hourglass spins, restarting its count, and falls on the lady. Soon we see that Ine was recounting her dream about the hourglass, and Shouzou says he had the same dream, so he's puzzled. Speaking of connections, today marks the 58th anniversary of their marriage, so Ine asks if her husband wants to eat something different, like a cake, for example. Shouzou replies that he doesn't mind eating the same old thing, and that eating cake is for kids, but she knows he must be playing hard to eventually show a surprise as always. Ine prepared red rice for tonight, and upon opening the refrigerator to check on it, she notices the piece of cake right next to it. Ine throws it in her husband's face that he was bluffing, and he returns the favor by displaying the rice prepared by his wife. Ine asks if her husband lies like this to the granddaughter too, so Shouzou replies that he only does it with his dear Ine because only she deserves that kind of lie. Then the two enjoy the surprises side by side as always. After the meal, Shouzou recalls that after finishing middle school, he went to work on the farm so he didn't have much time to study. Ine joined a women-only school in Tokyo for a brief period, and seemed like a dream there. She could eat white rice whenever she wanted, and the faucet was so good it seemed like a waterfall. However, with the arrival of the war, the school turned into rubble, and soon Ine was thrown into a life of anguish and loneliness in the swamp of the field. But it was there that she met the man of her life, and since then, the month didn't seem so bad anymore. Shouzou remembers that Tokyo was the typical capital where everything could be found, but Ine emphasizes that there are things in the countryside that cannot be seen there. However, as she decides to keep it a secret, the man is dying of curiosity. Later, Shiori shows up with a video game because, according to her father, it would be good to give to the grandparents to play to prevent dementia. On the other hand, Shouzou thinks that flashing lights on a screen shouldn't be children's favorite game, but rather a card game like Menko, Tag, or Spinning Tops. As they start the game Danger in the Rice Field 3, Shouzou is terrified of the undead, while Anne repeats the phrase Namu Amida Butsu, which means I take refuge in Amida Buddha. Within the game, an old man kept repeating tirelessly that things are about to get ugly, and Shouzou believes that the man there has already been caught by dementia. When they find a healing herb, In thinks she will be punished by the Buddhas for stealing from someone else's house. The grandpa, however, doesn't believe it's possible to heal by eating a sour cassava root. Reflecting on the poor undead, the couple agrees that it wasn't their choice to become like this, so they must shoot the poor souls in the head to spare everyone's suffering. After exterminating the enemies one by one, a zombie drops a chainsaw, and since the husband already has the shotgun, the wife takes the chainsaw. Right next to them, the zombies were making a tremendous mess in the rice field, so the farmers decide not to have mercy on these wrongdoers. Together, they cut and blew up every undead present until they exterminated that putrid race from the sacred rice field. The next day, they had already platinumed the game, so they gave up because there was nothing else to do. Later, Mino arrives home and reunites with Shiori after a long time. With a teasing look, she hugs her cousin, who tries to push the girl back. They study at the same school, but since it's in different buildings, they barely see each other. In childhood, they had some closeness because they always played together, but as Shiori insists on reminding, that's water under the bridge. For Mino, what isn't water under the bridge is Shiori's love for her grandparents. And it's so much love that the girl is still at their house until now, so she can act tough, but she's still a sweetheart inside. However, Shiori is irritated and corrects Mino, saying that it's not quite like that with this talk of liking grandparents, but she didn't count on poor Shouzou crossing the room at that exact moment because upon hearing what Shiori said, the old man's about to have the fit thinking his granddaughter hates him. With the typical stubbornness of a pre-adolescent, the girl stubbornly refuses to justify herself, but soon she gives in and explains to her grandfather that it was just a way of speaking. In the end, she doesn't admit that she loves her grandfather, but she asks him not to hate her, and that's enough for the old man to soften his heart and thank her for being alive up to this moment. Sometime later, Shouzou is once again thrown into the daily dream where he's facing a hourglass, just like his wife. Shouzou reflects that since they became young again, they've been making the most of their time together, but there are still many things they haven't done, like the honeymoon in Yoshiaki. With their bodies rejuvenated, it's now possible to fulfill dreams that were lost with old age, and the couple enjoys every moment as if the hourglass could turn over again at any moment. Until on this day, that's what happened. Upon waking up, Shouzou wakes up his wife and shows her that he lost his youth suddenly. He argues that fortunately he still doesn't feel the joint pains as before, but he believes that certainly his wife prefers the young version of her husband. In response, Ine clarifies that it wasn't the young or old version that made her fall in love, but Shouzou Saitou himself, the only one in the whole world. Listening with affection, Shouzou sees that his wife is right. Thinking that being old is something bad is disrespectful to all the history they have lived together because until yesterday, it was the condition they had, but it never stopped the couple from staying together and loving each other. Upon regaining his youth, even being an old version of himself, the man ended up forgetting who he really was. Therefore, even though Shouzou continues with this worn-out body, he promises to keep the honeymoon they promised. After all, he feels too young to give up on life. Back at the Saitou clinic, Takahiro has no idea what's going on with his parents because despite their aged appearance, Shouzou still has the muscles of a young man. Nevertheless, his liver and kidneys were not as lucky, so it's better not to overexert himself. Soon after, talking only with his mother, Takahiro informs that his father is a little healthier than he was before becoming young again. Therefore, his real concern is Ine because at the moment she has the body of a healthy 20-year-old, and if she ages from this condition slowly, it's worrying to think about how much life she would have ahead of her. Anyway, the woman doesn't fear her death, but the way things have been going, her husband will certainly depart first. After all, if she lives for another 70 years, their own children won't be in this world anymore, or maybe even their granddaughters, and that's the last thing Ine wants, to die alone. Later, Shouzou reveals to the family that he got old again. Nevertheless, he shows that his father's arm is still cracking, and he proves it in an arm wrestling match with his son. Yoshiaki asks the old man not to push it, but he's quite confident. Not as confident as his son, who promises to pay for a room with an outdoor bath and a tatami for the old man if he wins the contest. At that moment, Shouzou daydreams about a hot tub beside his cat-like naked wife, causing his veins to stiffen like a Saiyan transformation in their golden years, putting pressure on Yoshiaki. Mino, the judge, begins the countdown to the start of the match, which ends in a second with a resounding victory for Mr. Shouzou Saitou, who toasts with Ine to the power of perversion. Later, while shopping at a home improvement center, Shouzou feels that since he's grown old again, people look at him and Ine as if they're not a real couple. Because of this, he distances himself from his wife out of shame for what others might think, confessing to her that maybe it's better if they pretend they're not married when they go out together. To make matters worse, a clerk soon approaches, assuming Shouzou is looking for a gift for his granddaughter, and Shouzou decides not to correct him. But it's Ine herself who steps in and corrects the clerk, explaining that she is this man's wife. On the way back home, she makes it clear that she doesn't want to be anything other than his wife, regardless of what others may think. As days pass, Shouzou notices that Ine hasn't been eating her favorite treat in front of him, the mame daifuku, even though they used to enjoy it together when they were young. He understands that he's old now and may develop diabetes, but his wife, on the other hand, can't say the same. So he decides to question young Ine, but she says she's not hungry and will eat later. In the wee hours, Ine indulges in the sweets alone once again because her husband isn't taking care of his health, and since he's aged again, she's afraid of causing him serious problems, so she's avoiding tempting him with the daifuku. However, this time the old man was on the lookout to catch her in the act, and although she comes up with an excuse, Shouzou understands that she's worried about him. But for him, seeing the happiness on her face while enjoying her favorite treat is the best medicine. Thus, the couple understands each other once again and makes a pact to enjoy the treat without guilt. Many years ago, Ine recalls that her parents passed away and she lost her home, so she went to live with maternal relatives to work for them. Her father had a lot of money when he was alive, but since he acted arrogantly towards his wife's family, Ine ended up being despised by them. As if that weren't enough, the young girl couldn't even understand what the old ladies were saying because they used an older dialect of Japanese. Speaking the Tokyo dialect isolated her even more within the house, and her mother's family residence was not comfortable. Therefore, after finishing her work in the fields, young Ine spent her time at a Shinto shrine. Until one day, she met that young man from the rice harvest again and introduced herself as Sasaki. The man's name is Saitou, and he was picking apples not far away. Speaking of food, he hears the girl's stomach growl and offers her some of his rice. So the girl looks around and questions if he happens to know who she is. Regardless, Shouzou believes that no matter where the girl is from, it's no excuse to let her go hungry, so he leaves the rice with her, who realizes that not everyone in this region is stingy. A few days later, Shouzou began to return frequently to Ine's house in the late afternoon, using the excuse that he always passes by the shrine on his way home. However, things weren't going as expected, and the girl started to feel uncomfortable with the young man's presence, trying to keep him away so that others wouldn't misunderstand their relationship. To Ine, Shouzou was too restless and seemed illiterate, so she wondered if he could really soften her heart for a man like him. So returning to the present day, Ine's heart was as soft as melted butter, when suddenly, on an ordinary day, Shouzou had the hourglass dream again after a long time. Shouzou presumes that turning the hourglass back could bring back his youth, so he doesn't miss the chance to try his luck. Having done so, there was the old man with his former youthful appearance, but instead of celebrating, Ine just asked the man to fix his messy hair. However, Shouzou's return to youth once again raised the debate, and Ine questions whether they will indeed grow old and die like everyone else. In Shouzou's opinion, this hourglass works just like the others, and its sand continues to count time as it should, and someday it will run out too. Shouzou isn't sure what will happen when that day comes, but he believes it will be the end of their miraculous youth. Therefore, Ine shouldn't worry about eternity or about leaving after the children and grandchildren. Speaking of which, Ine is the only person Shouzou doesn't want to leave behind. He'll be there by her side, no matter what. The next day, the pair of boys, fascinated by the capital, stroll together while admiring the imported cars that exist in Tokyo, something not found in the countryside. So as they pass by the apple farm once again, Ine approaches the two to warn them that they're planning to spray agrochemicals in this area, and if that bothers the boys, it's better for them to take another path. As the boys thank the young lady for her kindness, Shouzou arrives with a red spraying car, leading the duo to believe that there are Ferraris in the countryside too. Later, Igarashi Takeda complains to Shouzou that he asked for someone to help in the warehouse, but he immediately brought the last person he wanted to see in front of him, his grandson Shouta. Soon the old man takes the young one to see the things his father and grandfather collected, like folding tables and war fans from the Takia family. Shouzou comments to the boy that there must be several relics in this warehouse because the Igarashi family owns a lot of land, so he asks if the gentleman is really going to throw all that away. Igarashi replies that he will, otherwise everything will become a pile of junk for the grandchildren's generation. Shouta questions if that black box will also be thrown away, and the old man repeats again that he will throw everything away. However, Igarashi looks carefully at the box and seems impressed with something. The boy asks the reason for this, so Shouzou explains that this box is a namagochi, and probably part of the boy's grandmother's dowry. When touching the box, Igarashi is moved by memories of good times spent with his deceased wife, so he asks to be alone for a while, and then the two leave the house. At that moment, Shouta calls the Kitamachi Education Secretary to protect his grandfather's cultural objects. Hours later, they carry out everything to be thrown away, and the black box was one of the few things left. Shouzou asks Igarashi what he will do with this warehouse, and the gentleman says that his children built houses in the city and will not inherit the farm. Moreover, there are no more craftsmen in this area capable of repairing this warehouse, so he will have it demolished. During a break, Shouzou asks Shouta if he doesn't think about staying in the countryside when he gets older, but as much as he is not sure, the boy's dream is to move to the capital and try to become a soccer player. At the same time, inheriting what his grandfather built is also good. At that moment, we discover that Igarashi was listening to the conversation, while his grandson adds that regardless of what he becomes in the future, he is aware that it was this land that made him who he is, and turning his back on his hometown gives the impression that it's something punishable by the gods. In summary, even if he fulfills his dream with soccer, he would love to bring life back to his grandfather's farm. At that moment, Igarashi bursts into tears and decides to cancel the demolition, only to hang up and continue crying with Shouzou about the incredible grandson he has. On the other side of town, as she always does on her days off, Shiori stops by the university library to study for exams as if she were already a college student. At least that was the plan, but she couldn't find any motivation for it. Yesterday, when she was talking to her grandfather about studies, she ended up disrespecting him, saying that he couldn't be her teacher since he didn't even finish high school. Suddenly, Mino sees Shouzou himself in the library, so she pretends not to see him to go unnoticed. However, the curiosity to know what Shouzou is doing with all those books is killing her, so she approaches to spy and sees that they are high school textbooks. Then she remembers her grandmother telling her that her grandfather wanted to finish high school, but unfortunately, he couldn't. So Shiori remembers that every adult always tells young people to study more, but the fact that her grandfather motivated her irritates the girl a bit. Later on, the embarrassed granddaughter of Shouzou thanks him for her getting 9th place in the midterm exams, and the young old man doesn't understand anything. At school, Mino hears a classmate gossiping that there's a couple in Minamimachi, a handsome guy and a beautiful girl with white hair. When asked if she knows anything about it, Mino plays dumb and says goodbye, and her classmates notice that the girl has been coming home very early lately. A short time later, Mino was at the ice cream shop with Shouta, because the two of them have been studying together and sharing some secrets. Mino comments that her grandfather keeps praising the boy, but Shouta feels embarrassed, so the girl changes the subject and asks if her friend has ever thought about getting married like her grandparents. In Shouta's opinion, Shouzou and Ine form an exemplary couple, and it would be nice to have something like that one day. Similarly, Mino has started thinking about this recently, and this declaration makes the atmosphere uncomfortable to the point where the boy asks for permission to go to the bathroom. Alone, Mino thinks about how much her grandfather approves of Shouta, praising him non-stop while the boy tries to convince himself in front of the mirror that he's not on a date. Arriving home, Mino tells about the cultural festival that will take place at her school, where her class will have a cafe this year. Ine is excited to be able to take her husband to her granddaughter's school, but Shouzou looks at the calendar and sees that Saturday is the day to spray the farm, and on Sunday, they will go to Takahiro's to check on his health, so it won't be possible. With that, Mino asks her grandmother to go alone, but Ine doesn't want to leave her man behind and enjoy the ride alone. Then old Shouzou looks carefully at the calendar and realizes that these tasks are for another week, so he is free for the event. Thus, he invites his wife to accompany him, and she wouldn't be able to reject a request from her beloved granddaughter. So the weekend arrives and the day of the Kita College Cultural Festival begins, and Shouzou remembers that the last time he stepped into a school was to evacuate one during a typhoon. Ine is very excited about this festival until a group of kids surrounds the couple trying to sell food, and a girl spills juice on Ine's blouse. Soon the girl offers to exchange the woman's clothes with someone from the fashion club. Arriving at the sewing room, the students were fascinated by how well the clothes they lent to Ine fit, while Shouzou waited outside, recalling the various arranged marriage proposals Ine claimed to have had with important people in the past. That day, the man asked what his wife did most at the women's college, and she replied that she loved music, so she often played instruments like the koto and piano, something Shouzou would have loved to see. Soon, one of the students calls the man to come in, and after all that suspense, Ine was wearing a school uniform that enchanted her husband in a way he hadn't felt in many, many years. Ine herself so fully embodied her years as a student with this outfit that she suddenly started using her old accent, and Shouzou thought she had amnesia. Observing his wife, he noticed that her gaze was the same as when they first met, while Ine celebrated the fact that they could be there as young people. Speaking of which, Shouzou also allowed himself to revert to his youth for a moment and tease his wife, so he asked if Miss Sasaki was interested in anyone at the moment. The woman declared that she had no interest in gentlemen, but her performance was so perfect that Shouzou began to think his wife had been possessed by her own pre-adolescent spirit. However, Ine couldn't keep up the act any longer and burst into laughter because she herself was feeling weird with the imitation. Anyway, she remembered that this question Shouzou asked was the same one the boys asked her 70 years ago, and she couldn't help but find it amusing, which instantly sparked her husband's jealous side. Outside, some students were pushing each other to see who would enter the room first, but the white-haired couple spared the effort of the young folks by opening the door. Next, it was time for them to see their granddaughter Miro's work, who had organized a cafe and was serving her customers in style. A colleague commented that she thought Shouzou was Mino's girlfriend, but neither he nor Ine paid much attention to that. The elderly young man mentioned that their group's cafe was somewhat empty, so Shouzou revealed that the class 3 next door, with the help of their parents, had set up a super cool ramen restaurant and monopolized the clientele. Since they had Mino, at least they could attract some boys, but on the other hand, it would be good to attract some girls to this pigsty for a change. Shouzou and Mino insisted on this issue of having someone willing to attract female clientele, so Ine encouraged Shouzou to join in the fun. In no time, the old ladies were all gathered at the door of room 2, causing the arrogant room 3 to revolt as they had moved mountains to set up a sinister restaurant. Inside, it was all success for Mino's group, with order after order, until an elderly lady left the room, commenting that the waiter even called her madam. The one responsible for this, obviously, was the young Shouzou Saitou, who was dragging the old ladies in droves to room 2. Every time he called the ladies madams, they became more excited. Later, looking at an old photo from the history of Kinamachi High School, Ine managed to find Haisuke and lamented that her husband hadn't advanced in school to also be in that picture. Realizing that her remark was a misstep, she backtracked and apologized to her husband, but he reassured her. After all, as he well remembered, his father had ruled out Shouzou's advancement at Kinamachi High School due to lack of money, and also because he was the eldest son, so he should plant and raise apples in the land of his ancestors. Looking back, Shouzou really lived in a time when he wished he had advanced in school, but today he thinks it was good not to insist on it. After all, not going there gave him the opportunity to meet Ine, for example. According to Shouzou, this photo was taken at that abandoned Shinto shrine, and the fact that he wasn't in the picture is proof that he was by his future wife's side. Ine even tried to express her emotion, but a bunch of kids filming the couple ended up deflating the moment. In the late afternoon, Shouzou was eager to invite Mino to dance in front of the bonfire, but the embarrassment was killing him. On top of that, her grandmother was keeping an eye on her, so it made the whole thing even more difficult. As if that wasn't enough, the girl was sad because she had no one to invite her to dance until Shouzou approached the boy and noticed he had his eye on the granddaughter, so he stepped in to pull Ine out and leave the two lovebirds alone. After that, the boy gathered courage and made the invitation. While the bonfire was going on, Ine complained because she wanted to see Mino dancing, but Shouzou didn't want to intrude too much on the children's territory and preferred to let them enjoy themselves freely. Sometime later during a dream, Ine was sure that wearing that school uniform transported her to ancient times of her youth, but now, to submit the paperwork to the government, she and Shouzou need to be in their original appearances. So she prepared to turn the hourglass, but a stumble caused her to break the object with her head. As a result, early the next morning, Shouzou appeared as an old man, but his wife was a woman with black hair who was fascinated by the technology of the modern era, like a weird board with moving people inside and a stove that lit up on its own. When she turned around, the girl introduced herself as Ine Sasaki. After the scare, Shouzou tries to explain to past Ine that she is his wife, and that her memory has rejuvenated along with her body, which is why she's freaked out by all this technology. From the woman's perspective, in return with her maiden name, she considers the old man might be telling the truth because she was wearing the same wedding ring as him. According to the man, she was the one who proposed to him back then, and this fact makes her wonder why she loved this guy so much to have spent 50 years by his side. So she asks Shouzou to make her fall in love with him once again and prove his point. As the life of someone who has traveled back decades is quite complicated, Shouzou suggests a good meal to fill their stomachs. Speaking of which, the electric rice cooker leaves the girl intrigued, not understanding how this could be possible. At first, she thinks a machine can't possibly prepare good rice, but upon tasting it, she changes her mind instantly. While washing the dishes after lunch, Shouzou noticed his young wife was intrigued by something. and she was indeed curious to see the man in the house doing household chores, which was unthinkable in her time. So Shouzou recalls that his father was the type who ruled the house, setting a good example of how he wouldn't want to be in the future. As he's not very good in the kitchen, Shouzou left most of it to his wife, but otherwise he always did most of the other chores. Ine finds this impressive on the man's part, but he doesn't see anything extraordinary about it, especially since his wife had always been by his side every day in the orchard working, so it's only fair he doesn't just stand around drinking sake while she does everything alone. Since the beginning of their relationship, it was like this with the two of them, and the priority was always the balance of tasks between the couple. With that said, Ine reflects that this was their daily routine that lasted for all these decades, with a man taking on household chores without complaint. Later, she becomes intrigued by a roll of film they had in the house, and at night Shouzou explains to the young woman that all this time travel talk is happening because of an hourglass that appears in both their dreams, and when Ine sleeps, she'll understand everything. The next day, the man was young again and leaving his old new wife amazed, but still she didn't dream about this hourglass, and she doesn't even have any memory of young Shouzou with this appearance, frustrating the guy. With that said, he turns away, and even though she doesn't remember the voice and face of the man, his downturned back with sadness makes her strongly wish he shared that pain with her. After that, Shouzou presents a photo of their son with his wife and daughter. According to him, they are great kids who don't fight and take care of the elders. Ine is moved by this, but at the same time worries about shocking everyone for having lost her memory. And speaking of the children, Shouzou had forgotten that Yoshiaki and his family were coming over today, and they hear Mino's voice from afar wanting to play with Grandpa. On the spot, Ine agrees to act as Mr. Saitou's wife as long as he tries to cover up the lack of accent and memory she suffered. After all, she may not know anything about the son and granddaughter, but probably the role of mother and grandmother is still the same, which is to make the kids feel comfortable. Mino's first comment was about her grandmother's black hair, while Yoshiaki asks about his father's health. Shouzou responds that he's doing great, and when Ine repeats this slang when responding next, everyone questions why the woman is speaking like that. Shouzou thinks quickly and says it's because of that cultural festival and those kids full of slang. In fact, he comments that Ine even wore a school uniform that day and ended up incorporating a bit of youth with it. Mino thinks it's cool to have a grandma all hip and talking like that, while Ine notices that her granddaughter is a kind and gentle girl with her grandparents and she seems a bit like her. So she improvises and gives the girl a slightly awkward hug, leaving everyone a little embarrassed. At dinner time, Shouzou teaches his young wife to add some ingredients to make rice with curry, so she chops the carrots and onions like crazy. Ine explains that in her house, the servants did everything, so she never learned to cook. Soon she wants to know if her husband is laughing at her for not even knowing how to cut an onion, but the man assures her he would never do that with her favorite carrot curry. With that said, she humbly asks the guy to teach her how to cut the ingredients, and Shouzou does it with all the patience and affection there is, taking the opportunity to tease the young woman, who curiously has a nostalgic feeling at that moment, just like yesterday when she ate the leftovers of food she made herself before losing her memory, which makes her wonder how she got to this point of cooking being so bad now. In the end, she realizes that the reason was always Shouzou. At mealtime, Mino notices that the potatoes are bigger than usual, so Shouzou pretends it's just her impression, but in reality, Ine was using the peeler as if it were a saw. In a flashback from the past, Yoshiaki joyfully said he got the highest score on a test, and his mother received the news with all the joy for her son's effort. When he reached adulthood, the boy grew up and found himself in a job market that didn't forgive, always demanding more and more results, never satisfied with the effort he made. Remembering this, Yoshiaki informed his parents that the company where he works is almost bankrupt because the local population decline is closing stores due to lack of customers. Shouzou recalls that his son can always come work in the orchard, but the man doesn't want to burden his parents at this stage of their lives, so he should strive more and more until he can get out of this situation on his own. It was at that moment that Ine took her son's hand and told him not to try harder than he already is, because as long as the people above him take advantage of his commitment, they will profit more on his back and still blame him. Amidst all the pressure, it's okay to take a step back and admit you're feeling down, as long as in the end you acknowledge the importance of getting back up when you realize it's possible. And at the end of the step back, it's important for Yoshiaki to know that his father and mother will be there, always ready to help with whatever is needed. After all, no matter the age, a child always remains a child. With that said, Yoshiaki opens up to the point of his nose running as he confides in his parents. After 2 bottles of beer, Yoshiaki says that Ine is his mother, but she's not really acting like his mother because she's giving off a different vibe. Afraid of being found out, Ine gently strokes her intoxicated son's head to make him drift off and feel that she's indeed his mother, despite everything. The next day, Shouzou takes his wife to the place where she confessed her love to him, but so far she doesn't remember anything special about that location. So she suggests they reenact how that moment was in the past to see if it refreshes her memory. With that, they sit together and Shouzou says she started by holding his hand. Ine trusts her husband and follows his lead, both feeling embarrassed as their fingers touch. However, Ine breaks character and says how ridiculous it all is because she would never do that, so they return home in a Cold War atmosphere after a marital argument. Sometime later, Ine visits her older sister in the Hirosaki hospital. Ine remembers how her sister always protected her when she was scared of thunderstorms, but now her sister is so old that she doesn't even respond. With this, Ine notices how cruel the passage of time is because her sister only remembers their mother at this point in her life, so the person who used to comfort her in difficult times is there, yet not there at the same time. In the meantime, Ine notices that Shouzou has been by her side all this time, even if silently, as if saying without saying that she's not alone. So she pulls him closer to her, but in reality, the old man just needed to use the bathroom but didn't want to get up. During the visit, Mrs. Tsuru sits in front of the piano as she used to do because she was an excellent pianist in her youth. Today, all she does is sit in silence without moving her fingers, so Ine takes action. By playing the piano for her sister, she remembers when Tsuru used to accompany her with whatever song she wanted to play. At this moment, Tsuru may not remember anything about her homeland where she spent most of her life or even Ine, but the music certainly brings a sparkle back to the old lady's eyes. She presses one of the keys with her thumb, surprising her sister, and then starts playing alongside her like in the old days, singing a song about still dreaming of those days even today. In the end, Tsuru says she doesn't know who the girl next to her is, but she plays very well. Upon hearing that while the music played on the piano, Ine cried at the opportunity to finally see her sister at least one more time. Weeks later, Ine's memory still hadn't returned, and now it was the first time she was alone because her husband was at the association meeting. Even today, she sees no sign of having fallen in love with him, and leaving a girl without memory alone in a strange house certainly isn't a positive point for him. Besides, the curvy he made isn't all that great, and he doesn't realize that whenever he's not around, she gets anxious about everything. Ine acknowledges that she shouldn't be anxious as she's been there long enough to know how to manage without needing help, but still, for some reason, she can't calm down. Perhaps only his presence by her side would make things calmer, and so she wishes he would come back soon. Suddenly, the memory of Shouzou saying he would never leave Ine behind surfaces as the broken heartlass rebuilds itself. At 16, Ine confessed to her future husband. It was sort of a joke, but after that, he started coming to the shrine every day for her. The relatives she lived with didn't get along with Shouzou's family and forbade the girl from seeing him, and after a long time apart, Shouzou showed up one day at her house in a heavy rain and begged them to date. That day, he had a bruise on his face after fighting with his father, and days later, Ine fell seriously ill and fainted, so Shouzou took care of her and paid for her treatment. Ine thinks all of this is a sign that this relationship only brings bad luck, but the man doesn't care about the absurdities that befall them because he will still love her forever, and indeed, he kept that promise. At that moment, Shouzou comes home after the meeting and Ine rushes to greet him, and as her hair turns white along the way, she regrets the bad things she said and realizes that her destiny would always be alongside Shouzou Saitou. The next day, Ine is back and wanting to know how her husband had so much patience with this mess, and he replies that both the current Ine and the past one are important to him in the same way. By the way, he mentions that his hand is resting on hers, and the past Ine takes the blame for the present help. With each passing day, the Saitou couple plans their long-awaited honeymoon. They would love to make a stop in Tokyo on their way to Atami, or perhaps even visit Akemi to play cards while sipping sake. However, to do so, they would need to catch the train during the Aomori station shift. Yet Shouta dampens their spirits by warning that the overnight train hardly runs anymore because nowadays the bullet train is typically used, taking only 3 hours to reach Atami. Ine is astonished because in the past, it was an 8-hour journey on the old train and she simply can't believe there's a faster way now. With this, Shouta questions Mino if it's really okay to help her grandparents as the girl requested. She says that the fact that the boy joined the Tokyo football team already helps a lot, but the young man is afraid the elderly couple might cause trouble on their own. Speaking of which, Shunmu insists he'll enter Tokyo with a watermelon on his head as tradition dictates. Shouta asks if Mino's grandparents know anyone in the Kanto area, and the grandfather explains that their daughter is there with her husband, although they are probably busy with work. Speaking of which, he thinks it would be great to have someone to guide them in Tokyo. At that moment, everyone looks at young Shouta, who sees no way out of this request, while Mino says she'll go too if the boy does. Ine expresses her joy at spending the honeymoon with her dear grandchildren, but Shouta loses his temper and shouts for everyone to calm down because he's not their grandson or anything like that. Smartly, Shouzou argues that this would be an excellent chance for Shouta to meet Mino in the capital. Nevertheless, Shouzou needs his grandfather's permission, so he takes the request to the elder. Revolted, Igarashi refuses the proposal without a second thought, filled with hatred in his heart. Because of this, Mino uses her charm and tells the old man that Shouzou is in the same class as her, and that it would be a great help if the boy accompanied her grandparents on this trip, with her also going along. With that said, the old man celebrates like crazy the fact that his grandson brought a bride home. The young ones try to explain that they're just friends, but Igarashi doesn't want to hear the truth. Nevertheless, the gentleman decided in favor of his grandson's trip. To prepare for this moment, Ine already gets her share of caramelized sweet potatoes from Mrs. Katja. Katja comments on how long it's been since they last saw each other, and Ine agrees, noting how empty the place is. Katja responds that times are different, and that even her shop probably won't last much longer. But the lady doesn't want to make the conversation heavy and wishes her friend a safe return. Before leaving, Ine expresses her fear of being swallowed by time and wishes to fight against it. Shortly after, another customer asks for 100 grams of caramelized sweet potato, and soon several other customers appear, making the shop owner wonder why there's such a hustle and bustle. A customer explains that he saw a girl standing outside the market and got curious, and soon Katja notices that Ine is there with all her beauty, eating sweet potatoes and making a great advertisement for passersby. 60 years ago, at Aomori Station, Shouzou bid farewell to a friend who was leaving for Tokyo in an attempt to make a living in the big city. Shouzou always said that the capital wouldn't be a good place for him, but secretly he wished for a chance in a place like that. 60 years later, the gentleman was so lost in this memory that Ine had to bring his attention back to entering the station. Before they all board the train, Yoshiaki wishes the boys a great trip but warns Shouzou that if anything happens to his daughter, something bad will happen to him. Before boarding, Ine asks if her husband has ever been to Tokyo, and he replies that he has never left this prefecture since he was born. Ine thinks it's her fault for her health worsening, but the man would never accept her taking that blame. The younger and older versions of his wife confuse him and invite him to leave. Despite the romanticism, they were getting on a train to Hokkaido, but the grandchildren managed to get the elders off in time. At the beginning of the journey, Ine is startled by the speed and asks how many miles per hour this thing is going. According to Shouzou, it's 186, so Shouzou worries about zooming past Mount Fuji and not being able to see it. But Shouzou explains that they should be on another line for that. Mino asks why the grandparents are in elderly form, and they explain that they're using the silver discount and it would probably cause trouble if they look young. With that said, the train announces that the next stop is Sendai Station, and as tradition dictates, they take a nap and tell their grandchildren not to wake them up even if the track derails. Sometime later, they finally arrive in Tokyo, so Shouzou and Ine revert to their young form to enjoy this moment. First, they make a stop in Musashi, where Akimi lives and where Shouzou will visit his maternal grandmother. Unfortunately for Akimi, she was sick right when her mother was coming to visit her, and on top of that, she only managed to get time off for this moment, but she'll have to spend the whole time sick and feverish. Akimi remembers that at times like this, her mother used to make porridge for her, always taking such good care of her that in her childhood the girl thought she was in paradise, even when feeling unwell. Speaking of which, Akimi feels a hand touching her forehead to check her temperature, and she thinks she's hallucinating when she sees Ine looking young as she did when Akimi was a child. It took an hour to explain everything that was happening, but it seems that was enough to make the confused woman understand. The visitors ask if the homeowner doesn't want to rest a bit, but the shop was so great that it even woke her up a bit. Then the Saitou couple comments that Tokyo seems like it's not part of Japan, it's so different, and that even during a stop in Asakusa, some schoolgirls asked to take a photo with them. Then they ask about Akimi's family, and Mino tells them that the aunt and her husband have a very large family, including grown children who have already left home and had their own children. Speaking of the kids, Kosu, the great-grandson, is greeted by his great-grandfather with a big surprise. The kid thinks Shouzou is his fake dad because Shouzou looks incredibly similar to Shinji. However, soon the boy was having fun with the resemblance between the two. So the next day, after explaining everything to Akimi's family, Mino and Shouzou went to the Shinjuku area. Meanwhile, the honeymoon couple went to Sugamo Shopping Street and were amazed by the variety of products there, such as Buddhist utensils and Chinese medicine items. First, Shouzou decides to stop by a specialized hairmeki store, while his wife takes a stroll. The shopkeeper thought Shouzou was looking for something for his grandfather, but he was actually looking for himself. Ine thought she was just going to browse the market, but ended up with bags full of purchases. Upon returning to the harameki store, she sees her husband becoming a hit and attracting a crowd of elderly ladies who drooled over the man, thinking he was some kind of handsome gentleman. Consequently, Shouzou takes the harameki to wear under his clothes when going out, as he always does. Later, Ine is surprised to find out that her husband had reserved 2 seats at a restaurant because he wanted her to try a parfait there, Seeing the wonder on the table, Ine asks how much it cost, but her husband doesn't want her to worry about it at this special moment. Nevertheless, she feels like she'll be punished by the heavens for eating something so luxurious, so she eats just one strawberry to satisfy her craving. However, the expression on her face after the first spoonful makes it clear that she's going to devour that parfait without hesitation. Afterwards, they go to the game center to take some photos for keepsake, but the couple ends up looking like they went to get their ID cards. Because of this, Mino decides to teach the grandparents and pulls Shouzou to show them how it's done, taking several photos with various poses and writings. Consequently, Shouzou and Ine understand better how this business works and decide to try again. This time, they loosen up a bit to take a different photo, trying to imitate the young people by drawing on the images. When showing the result to others, they can hardly believe how tacky it turned out. Finally, the four take a photo together. Upon returning to Aunt Ikimi's house, Shouzou promises to give some spinning tops to his great-grandson, who's thrilled to receive the gift, but soon sees what was in the package and becomes furious. Shunzuk, Akemi's youngest son, explains to his grandfather that he misunderstood. In fact, Kaosu wanted a spinning top with a blade with ball bearing to defeat the opponent's spinning top. Shouzou looks at those B-blades and believes it would be a fair battle against his old spinning tops, so he challenges his great-grandson to a match, and if the little one wins, the great-grandfather will give him a new toy. With the duel confirmed, they prepare the track, and Shunzuk warns Shouzou that these old spinning tops are no match for the new ones. Nevertheless, a challenge has been made, so the battle begins. As soon as Kaosu launches his B-blade, Shouzou uses every fiber of his muscles to spin a hurricane-shaped spinning top that isolates the boys, who cries the humiliating defeat. To make up for it, the old man buys a present for his great-grandson anyway. As night falls, the two were exhausted, taking a nap. In the kitchen, Takemi has an old memory, and upon that, she comments to her mother that she was afraid she would think she was abandoned after her daughter got married and left home. Deep down, Takemi blames herself for always worrying about Ine's health, but never doing anything to improve it. Saying this, the woman hugs her mother tightly, just like she used to do when she was a child. Anne replies that just the fact that Takemi is well is enough for her, even with the distance. Meanwhile, in Manamanachi, Shiori looks for her grandparents, but remembers they are traveling. Despite this, she also remembers that they keep a key hidden in a stone in the backyard, so she manages to get into the house. Inside, the girl is invaded by memories of her grandparents, although she went there to study peacefully, as she doesn't feel comfortable doing it at home. However, she begins to suffer from the fear of her grandparents leaving and her not being able to do anything else. She reflects that she will grow up in a few years, have her own family, and not depend on anyone. And when that happens, neither of them will be there anymore. Therefore, Shiori deeply wishes for Shouzou and Ine to return soon. Meanwhile, the two end up suffering at the same time from a strange lightning strike. Next, a representative from Ganu Productions approaches the couple, and they remember Shouta saying that their appearance will attract a certain type of person. Whatever happens, they must reject this person. So In tries to scare the man away without even hearing what he has to say, while Shouzou loses his temper and curses the guy. The man explains that Shouzou is tall and has a face with beautiful proportions, so being on the cover of a magazine will not be a distant dream. This time it's Ine who rages against the man, saying that her husband is indeed handsome, but it's indecent to ask him to show off to all the women in the country in front of his wife. When they meet Shouta again, they explain that they managed to kick that man out in the end by saying with all honesty that they are actually in their 80s. Whether he likes it or not, the man quietly leaves. So finally, the family arrives in Atami, and both Shouzou and Ine can't hold back the tears for fulfilling such an old dream. As their first stop, they head to the Izumo Inn. Everyone is enchanted by what they see there, and Shouzou already has his eye on the outdoor bath, so In asks Shouta to share the room with her husband. A bit later, the old man keeps insisting on the outdoor bathtub, but his wife is calling the granddaughter to go take a bath with her there. The man gets frustrated and seems obsessed with this idea until In scolds him because the children need to be sleeping for them to enjoy the bathtub. Later, the family is amazed by the feast on their table, and the elderly couple is truly touched by this level of food. And since this opportunity doesn't come every day, In offers some drink that Shouzou accepts, apologizes to his liver for it, and throws the drink down. On the other hand, Shouta seems unworthy of eating something so luxurious. Inside his head, he dwells on the reason why men are separated from women on the Saitou's honeymoon, and he thinks it's his fault. Speaking of which, Mino expresses how happy she is that Shouta accompanied her on this trip. By the way, she would surely be scared in Shinjuku if she had gone alone, since many people talked to her, but only the boy's presence made things calm. In adds that without Shouta, it wouldn't even have made it there. Then Shouzou asks everyone to drink like he is doing, even if it's just juice, so he teaches that everyone should take 3 consecutive sips. Everyone does it and doesn't understand anything, but the old man says they will understand at the right time. When it's time to sleep, Mino says goodnight to Shouzou, who is terrified to realize he's actually sleeping in the same room as the girl he likes. A little earlier, the couple's granddaughter said it would be strange for her grandparents to sleep separately while on their honeymoon, so Ine allowed the granddaughter to sleep with Shouzou to be a surprise. In fact, Mino asked the boy to keep it a secret or else her father will kill them both. The girl thought her grandparents would be cuddling at that moment, but Shouzou fell asleep very quickly. Shouzou remembers that the couple acted like newlyweds, with Shouzou trying to hold Ine's hand but always stopping halfway. Speaking of which, Mino asks the boy to call her darling and act like her grandfather because she wants to feel how her grandmother feels when she hears something like that. Accepting the challenge, Shouzou does his best old man imitation and asks his darling if dinner is ready. Mino finds it funny and joins in, imitating her grandmother and asking her darling to marry her. Shouzou remembers they are already married and they both laugh together. Then Mino comments that her grandparents sometimes call each other by their first names and she likes that, so Shouzou blushes before calling the girl Mino. Embarrassed in the same way, the girl thinks it's best for both of them to go to sleep at this point. Meanwhile, Shouzou is talking in his sleep about his desire to go to the bath with his wife, and Ine sees that even resting, the guy doesn't stop thinking nonsense. However, the man got drunk on sake and is in no condition to get up, even after bothering them all day to get into that bath together. Ine feels like an idiot for spending the day waiting for that moment. However, she's not going to wake up Shouzou. Suddenly, the couple was in the long-awaited bath, and after longing for this special moment, Shouzou looks like a child in an amusement park in front of his wife, but just when he was about to touch her, he actually turns the hard glass by accident. The next day, Ine tries to wake her husband from the dream because today they agreed to go to the beach, and she grumbles that it would be strange for him to go in his old form. Soon he was explaining that in his dream, the woman's melons were actually hard glass, so he ended up spinning that thing unintentionally. Anyway, Ine goes to the beach with her granddaughter, who admires her grandmother's stunning beauty as if everyone on the beach focused their sights on this singular figure. However, someone who was behind the woman also stole certain glances with his extremely defined and muscular body despite his advanced age. With that, the men on the beach realized they couldn't even talk to that white-haired lady. Soon Shouzou was calling Shouzou to race to a lookout point 3 kilometers away in the water, and he even eggs the kid on, saying that if he loses to an old man, he won't be able to be with his granddaughter. Meanwhile, the girls stay in the shade of the sand, and upon seeing her granddaughter in a bikini, the woman observes how much she has grown in so many different ways until the people on the beach draw everyone's attention to an old man swimming like a flying fish in the sea, with a kid giving his all right beside him. After his victory, Shouzou teases the young man, saying his path is still long. Later, Shouzou regrets seeing his wife waste the chance to go into the sea after having taken the trouble to buy a swimsuit. Ine says she loves staying in the shade, besides reminding herself that she's still an 80-year-old lady inside, so she doesn't feel comfortable in a bikini because of that, despite her husband trying to convince her that even in that form, his wife was still a sight to behold. Frustrated, he laments not being able to show off his wife like everyone else is doing on that beach, but Ine says he reaps what he sows because when she fell ill, the men got her used to going to the beach with him and their granddaughter and leaving Ine in the shade. But anyway, just that gesture alone makes her happier than anything. Finally, Ine decides to rinse the sand off her legs in the shower, and there she's in her swimsuit, reflecting on whether or not she could flaunt herself like this in public. As soon as she returns to her husband, he begs her to take off her top because as much as he has seen her naked many times, it's very different from having the privilege of seeing his beloved in a bikini. However, Ine doesn't want other men to see her like that besides her husband, and Shouzou comes from afar complaining quietly that these two are sweeter than anything. A little later, Mino is researching the meaning of those 3 sips her grandfather performed yesterday with everyone, and she discovers that it has to do with a practice in wedding ceremonies, so she feels moved to discover this near Shouzou. At night at the inn, Mino and her suitor are playing ping pong, until the elderly couple arrives and spends exactly 10 minutes disputing the first point, gathering around the table a crowd of curious spectators to see who would win this coveted point. However, time passes and nothing changes in the game, so there's a real doubt among the people outside if it could last forever. After the intense ping pong match, Ine goes to wipe her sweat in the bathtub that Shouzou so wanted to share with her. However, he was in his old phase, so he asks if that wouldn't be a problem. But as always, Ine would never mind seeing her husband, regardless of how he looks. Soon she remembers when they were young again for the first time. Excited to the extreme, the first topic discussed was about living their long-awaited honeymoon. Thinking now, Ine thinks it would be kind of embarrassing if they were still so old and in the same situation as now, and Shouzou agrees that it would be like the image of 2 demons straight from hell, while Ine laughs just thinking about her husband touching her flabby skin. At the same time, the hourglass continues to pour its sand down drop by drop, and the couple hopes that the gods will be merciful to them and extend this time as far as it can go. The next day, the family visited a Shinto shrine near the inn, and Ine asks what her husband is doing looking at those emo wish plaques, but Shouzou gives some lame excuse and sneaks away from there. At the same time, Mino arrives wanting to write on a plaque, and Shouta writes his wish to play in the national soccer tournament. The girl, on the other hand, tries to hide what she wished for on the emo plaque, but ends up revealing that she would love to get good grades on her exams. However, while showing this side of the plaque, on the other side it was written that she wants to return soon to Atami with her crush. Looking at the other plaques, In finds her husband's where he asks for health and safety for the family. The woman doesn't understand why Shouzou would insist on hiding such a wish, so her intuition tells her something's wrong. Meanwhile, Shouzou is in another part of the temple, begging for something not to turn again. At that moment, In finds another wish from her husband asking to be his beloved husband again in their next life. Ine is happy to see that her man wished for the same thing she did. Nearby, a huge camphor tree about 2,000 years old decorated the background of the shrine, and Mino warns that there is a very famous energy place there. The elderly ask what that is, so the granddaughter explains that every time you go around a sacred tree, your life lasts one more year. Without ceremony, the couple prepares to take 100 laps around the course, and Ine asks if Shouta isn't interested in doing the same. On the other hand, he isn't very concerned about his health at the moment, but Mino reveals that this tree also grants wishes when you go around it, and speaking of that, the girl would love to have company for that. So as they walk around the tree, Shouta would like to walk alongside Mino as someone more than a friend, someone very special to her. At that moment, whether unintentionally or not, their hands touch, and Ine and Shouzou are spying on the scene and begging to have a great grandchild. However, Shouta chickens out and can't hold their granddaughter's hand. At night, he says that even if his dream of being a player comes true, he still plans to return to his hometown one day to reward the land that took care of him for so long. Speaking of which, he wants to know what Mino will do after graduating from high school, but she seems to have never thought seriously about it. As the boy falls asleep, she seems worried about this issue because Shouta seems to reflect very maturely on these future issues, but Mino has no idea what to do with her life. To be fair, she has the reference of her grandparents and feels that it would be a good life to take care of a farm, and as a symbolic gesture for the future, she kisses Shouta's forehead while he sleeps. At dawn, Shouta asks if there's something on his face because Mino can't take her eyes off the boy, but she was just trying to imagine how the boy would be when he became a grandfather. Then, in an old memory, Shouzou discovers that his father died and left numerous debts, which Shouzou himself inherited and now has to pay. Because of this, he will have to sell half of the orchard that they mortgaged, forcing them to postpone their honeymoon. Calmly, In says it's something beyond her husband's control and that they will surely figure it out. Despite everything, Shouzou promises that one day he will take his wife on that honeymoon because she will be cured. He will earn a lot of money, and then they will have that dream come true. In the end, the two couldn't save money until their children became adults and Ine's illness was never cured. However, Shouzou ended up fulfilling what he promised. Remembering this on the way back, the woman discreetly places her hand on top of her husband's. On the next day in the library, a young man tries to find an object he lost until Shiori shows up and returns the boy's library card, which was lying under the table. Looking down, she sees that he was carrying books on mysterious rejuvenation legends. Soon, the two were chatting about life, and the girl reveals that she's trying to go into the medical field. The young man introduces himself as Satoshi Takahashi, and that he's in his second year in the medical field. Shiori glances sideways when he claims to be a veteran in the area she intends to enter, and then asks about the books he's reading. Satoshi explains that for a long time there have been stories of elderly people rejuvenating in this region, and apparently, this happens every 100 years. He's very interested in this subject and likes to think that there might be someone very close to him who has undergone this phenomenon. Later, he asks if she is considering medicine because her father is a doctor and she believes that might be part of the reason, but she is also inspired by her grandparents and how they always prioritize others' happiness, even when they themselves are suffering. They have saved Shiori on several occasions, so she wants to have the ability to save them when necessary. Satoshi asks if the girl has ever thought of telling them this because surely her grandparents would be crying tears of joy if they heard something like that. And of course, Shouzou is keeping an eye on the conversation, proving the young man's point. That's why when Shiori arrives at the elderly couple's house, they hug the girl as if she had been rescued from a kidnapping. On the other side of the coin, Yoshiaki can't stop thinking that his daughter, Mino, has been acting very strange lately, coming home later and dodging the subject when asked why. In argues that she's at that age, but the man doesn't take it so lightly because he's sure the girl is hiding something from him. Obviously, Ine and Shouzou know exactly what's going on. Although Yoshiaki considers that perhaps Mino is involved in some kind of cult or getting romantically involved with a bad boy. Just thinking about it, the man loses his temper at the thought that his daughter will never be the same again, once she's had her soul sucked by social media or whatever these young people are doing with their phones nowadays. However, Ine is sure that Mino's generation is much calmer than Yoshiaki is painting it. Besides, that girl is sweet, unlike Yoshiaki himself, who was a pest at her age. Yoshiaki acknowledges his rebellious phase and apologizes, although he met his wife when he was treating injuries after a fight. Afterwards, the pair of young dreamers aiming for the capital return to the Saitou's orchard to ask them something. For some reason, they haven't seen the old folks who used to take care of the orchard anymore. Caught off guard, Shouzou makes up that the old folks are too tired, so he and his wife, who are relatives, are taking care of everything until they return. With that said, the boys are satisfied with the answer and leave. Shouzou is relieved that they bought that story, while Ine would love to do something to ease those boys' hearts. Thinking about it, when night falls, the woman turns the hourglass of their dreams. When morning comes again, the boys pass by the farm as usual, worried that the elderly couple might be ill. Suddenly, they look ahead and see the two working as they always have, and that reassures the boys. A little later, Mino says goodbye to her grandmother and sets off for school, but the old lady notices that her granddaughter forgot her lunchbox on the table. On her way to school, the girl discovers the same thing, and the worst part is that this lunchbox is one she only gets a few times a month. In the meantime, Ine puts on her sports jacket and calculates that it will take her an hour to get to her granddaughter's school. And since her husband is using the mini truck to work on the farm, the old lady hops on her bike and sets off on the journey. Mino feels sad knowing that her grandmother woke up early to prepare that lunchbox for her, until a passenger sees something crazy happening outside. Mino's friend draws her attention to it and is Ine pedaling as if her life depends on it, asking the little girl to get off the next station. After this episode, the girl's grandmother became extremely popular at school for a justifiable reason, mind you. Back to Shiori, she meets Satoshi again at the library, and she notices that the boy occasionally lets slip a country accent. He apologizes for that as he was raised by his grandmother, but the girl doesn't mind. On the other hand, the fact that she gets nervous around this boy bothers her a lot. Remembering a conversation with Mino, Shiori told her that she has no crush, so Mino asks her what she thinks of guys who are as kind as Grandpa Shouzou. Imagining the old man with that country accent, the girl dismisses it without a second thought. Anyway, she asks Satoshi why he's so interested in this rejuvenation subject, so he decides to come clean and show a picture of his grandparents aged, and in the next image he reveals that they suddenly became younger. Immediately, Shiori remembers that talk about a golden apple and an apple tree in the orchard and discovers that Hajime and Setsu Takahashi went through the same process. Talking with the youngsters at the table, Setsu asks if the little girl there is her grandson's girlfriend, but he explains that it's nothing like that. In fact, Shiori asked to meet the rejuvenated couple, and for some reason, she doesn't seem shocked at all by this fact. Hajime thinks his grandson should follow the girl's lead and not care about it anymore and focus on studies, but Satoshi makes it clear that he's doing this research because he wants to, as his grandparents became his parents after his real parents divorced. This is a way of repaying everything they did for him. Paying attention to that, Shiori reflects that the boy is doing it for those he loves, just like she wants to pursue medicine for the same reason. Following that, the rejuvenated couple apologizes for the madness they're talking about, but Shiori believes in everything that's happening. Speaking of which, she would love for them to meet two people from her family. Without delay, the epic encounter unfolds and both couples are amazed to learn they're not the only ones who've gone through this crazy ordeal. In no time, the two couples bond over what they have in common. After a few beers, the two men remark that it's about time their grandchildren started thinking about marriage, leaving the kids embarrassed. Speaking of which, Shiori thinks they all got along too quickly, but Satoshi sees nothing wrong with it, especially because their equal footing gives them plenty to talk about and vent about. Shiori asks if she and Satoshi will one day be an old couple too, and the boy presumes they will, until he realizes they never even talked about it before. That said, Shiori realizes the blunder she made and immediately starts coming up with excuse after excuse. Later, recounting a story, Setsu recalls working and living in a boarding house where drunk men wouldn't leave her alone until one day Hajime appeared from the room next door and put an end to the nonsense. Since then, the two started dating, and Setsu believes there's no one better in the world than her husband for that reason. Upon hearing this, Ine feels a sting and comments that Shouzou has also dedicated his entire life to her. So he's definitely not the second best husband in the world. Not to be outdone, Setsu emphasizes how caring her husband is, but Ine asserts that caring is an understatement for Shouzou, as he has always shared all the tasks with her. As things heated up, the two agree to compete in best of three to see who has the best husband. As everyone gathers, Shouzou questions why his wife is taking this so seriously, until he sees on her face that it's to give everything in this competition. So Shouzou immediately calls Matsunosuke to come over. As soon as the old man arrives, Ine asks him to be the judge of the competition, and without hesitation, the newest referee of the competition jumps into the first round of tug of war and immediately follows it up with a best of 3, where the winner is whoever reaches his wife first. Stu and Ine and Setsu start cheering on their husbands to give it their all, while Hajime reflects that the 5 decades spent with his wife are flashing before his eyes, so defeat is not an option. On the other end of the rope, Shouzou is more vein-popping than Goku turning Super Saiyan, and so he finally manages to reach his wife. Ine celebrates joyfully, but she was outside the circle where she should have been reached. As a result, the Takahashis win the first round. In the next challenge, each woman prepared 2 portions of kaiyaki, which consists of egg and miso cooked in a scallop shell. Each man will have to eat 2 plates and say which was made by his wife. However, neither of them had any idea which was which, no matter how much they ate, because they seemed to taste the same. Thinking quickly, Shouzou remembers that the referee never said they had to choose only one dish, so he declares that both are from his wife, and this cleverness gives the sadist the victory in the second round. To show off, Ine continues the competition and shows that her husband knows exactly which food is hers, and Setsu wants to do the same, but Hajime thinks it's too embarrassing for him. Soon it was time for the third round, and the 2 women were discussing what the theme of the competition would be as long as it was some sort of intelligence game. Amidst suggestions, Setsu proposed a math challenge, making Shouzou tremble from head to toe. Suddenly, Matsunosuke interrupts them and asks what the heck this competition is all about. Upon learning what it's about, the old man scolds the women, teaching them that there's no winner when comparing one's love to another's. For example, Matsunosuke himself doesn't mind being a loser to his wife as long as she stays by his side forever, and it's this message of love that he wants to convey. That said, coincidentally, the man's wife was passing by at that exact moment, and she confesses that upon hearing that declaration, she fell in love with her man all over again. Given the circumstances, a tie is declared and the 3 couples gather for a party that lasted until the early hours of the morning. Sometime later, Shiori asks her grandmother to teach her how to cook, and the old lady starts with eggplants wrapped in shiso leaves, but the girl refuses. Next, she tries zenmei with seasoning, but the girl rejects it. The same thing happens with the suggestion of dried fish because the girl doesn't want old people food, so they end up frying a chicken karaj. Then Ine asks why her granddaughter suddenly became interested in cooking, and she says she wants to bring something to eat when she studies at the library. Her grandmother remembers that the girl always said she hated fried food, but she replies that she doesn't think that way anymore. Observing her granddaughter, Ine sees her a little more mature than before. So when the weekend arrives, Shiori takes the fried chicken to Satoshi, who loves the food, but she didn't actually make it. She took what was left from the day her grandmother cooked. The next day, the youngest old couple in Japan watched a horror movie starring the terrifying Dasako, a horror character that became extremely popular among their granddaughter, Mino's generation. Shouzou admitted that the special effects nowadays are great, but at the same time, he thought it was an exaggeration for people to scream just because there's a ghost coming out of the TV. When he asked Ine for her opinion on the matter, she was praying with a juzu in hand, a kind of Japanese rosary, putting coarse salt near the TV and covering it with a sheet. When it came time to sleep, the old man was in another dimension within his own sleep, while his wife couldn't close her eyes, seeing evil faces in the wooden ceiling. Suddenly, she rose from the bed with strangely reddened eyes and an intense glow, until she lay back on her husband's chest and resumed praying. The next day, Mino asked her grandparents what they were doing near a small tree, and they told her that Takahashi had passed by and gave them a young apple tree seedling. However, planting a new apple tree now is complicated because it will be a lot of work, but they didn't want to throw it away. Thinking about it, Mino remembered a conversation she had with Shara about a dream she wanted to fulfill after graduating from high school. So she asked her grandparents to give her that seedling, since her birthday is next week. Shouzou emphasized that apple trees need to be taken care of very well, and they can live as long as a human. But the girl promised she would handle everything. Even though she knew it would be a big challenge, she believed that having a tree growing with her sounded beautiful. Lately, she's been thinking a lot about the future, and she imagines that having a farm could be really cool. But for her to properly take care of everything involved in this dream, she needs to learn as soon as possible how to take care of things like that seedling, for example. With that, the elderly couple is proud of their granddaughter, who continues to confess that she's not sure about having a farm or not. However, seeing someone she admires pursuing their goals while she's not made her feel like she needs to shake off the dust and go after what she wants. Speaking of that person, Mino calls Shouta to do something tomorrow morning. A day later, the boy helps the girl plant the seedling, and she likes to think about the idea of the apple tree living until they become grandparents. When that day comes, the children won't be there anymore, not even the ones from elementary school. Maybe no one else will be living in that area, and that generates a feeling of loneliness in Mino. Pausing to remember, she recalls that her grandparents planted an apple tree to celebrate their wedding, and this thought brings a strange sensation to her. Shada points out that he doesn't know what tomorrow will bring, but he asks her to come to the orchard when he's an adult. That is, if Mino isn't married and living somewhere else. However, Mino asserts that she will wait for him. Not just once, but she confirms again when the boy pretends not to understand. Spying on the conversation, Shouzou and Ine are moved by the scene and decide to make red rice for dinner tonight. A few years ago, the couple planned to have a yomiya, a traditional summer festival for the local deity, just as they did in the past, because undoubtedly the deity would love to come to their world and drink with the people. Soon the shrine was all set up to receive the event, and Mino was trying on a beautiful yukata that her grandmother lent her. In fact, Ine tells that this outfit belonged to her daughter Akimi, because the old lady has always been satisfied with her traditional outfits. Frustrated, Mino believes that the dress would look great on her grandmother, so she feels uncomfortable with something behind it. To solve the problem, the girl grabs her phone and calls her mother to talk about these yukatas she has in the closet. Shortly after, Shouzou arrived home and saw his wife wearing one of those clothes and was amazed. At night, in some corner of the event, the cats fed on the raw fish thrown away next in the stalls, while the children played and the adults drank in communion. Shouzou was already a little altered, but his friend poured another round of drinks into the man's glass. Reflecting on this relationship between her husband and the neighbors, Ine likes to think that this bond is very important, and speaking of that, it's likely that she'll stay up until late drinking with the buddies while she stays out. According to her, it's good to endure certain things and leave one's own happiness for later. That's the definition of a good life, something she should have accepted a long time ago. Even though she's old on the inside, a restlessness of young people hits the woman's body, making her focus on not expressing it on her face. Suddenly, Shouzou appears in front of Ine, visibly altered, but the world of the woman regains its glow upon noticing the presence of the one she loves. Meanwhile, the people who stayed drinking lament the departure of the friend because they wanted to know more about the story of becoming young again. However, one of them asks what they prefer after all: alcoholic drinks, tears, or women. Without hesitation, the others respond that they only worship the drink that exists within them, so the bald old man observes that's why all the young people aren't with them. Walking among the crowd, Ine stares at a couple sharing 2 sweet strawberries, so her husband asks if she wants one, but she refuses. Reflecting on the woman's response, the man considers that her attitude has a lot to do with the lifestyle imposed on everyone in the Showa period, as if it were a crime to wish for something, as if we should only live to work. So he insists on offering a strawberry to his beloved, who continues to refuse. He goes further and reminds her that she loves this fruit, and since they just ate yakisoba, a sweet treat would be very nice. Ine gradually gives in and starts to like the idea, but still thinks that paying 500 yen for a strawberry is a bit too much because it's the price of a full meal. That said, despite the speech, Shouzou ends up convincing the woman to accept the sweet. Meanwhile, the man had no idea that this humble strawberry would open the gates of hell when Ine orders all the ready takoyakis at a stall. Later, she scores a headshot on a stuffed bear of his shooting booth, eager to grab the creature that reminds her so much of her husband. However, the stall owner knows very well that a gun like that one doesn't have the firepower to take down the bigger prizes, and hitting the target isn't enough. It's necessary to knock it down. Since he surgically adjusted the pressure to weaken it, the only way to knock down the prize would be by shooting several times and rapidly. On the other side of the counter, Shouzou claims he's the man and assures he'll cover his wife in the shootout. Armed with corks between his fingers, the young elder and his wife face the target with a determined expression, until they both shoot simultaneously at the bear, leaving it staggering. After that, they reload the gun and pull the trigger simultaneously once again, hitting the poor bear, which falls lifeless on the shelf. In the face of this unprecedented achievement, the couple was observed by the people around with a mix of terror and admiration, while Shouzou Saitou, a former member of the hunting club, invites his wife to sit somewhere and take a break from being champions. In the next scene, in a dream, Ine illustrates in her mind the philosophy that when 2 people love each other, one dies first and leaves the other behind. The one who stays feels overwhelming loneliness for the rest of their life, fulfilling the inevitable destiny of a love that was almost forever. In this dream, Ine discovers that these visions were a warning of how close she was to kicking the bucket, and she is amazed to learn how many days she has left. Upon waking up from the nap next to Shouzou, she already imagines that she won't have the same amount of sand in the hourglass as her husband. Either way, she concludes that reality is cruel. Shouzou asks if Ine heard any voices in her dream because he himself heard one too. He was warned that he'll last the year, but his wife doesn't need to reveal how much time she has left if she doesn't want to. With that said, Ine gets closer to her husband and reveals that she has a week left to live. While Shouzou wraps his arm around her, she shares that she felt death approaching for over a month. Despite being sickly for as long as she can remember, she feels privileged to have lived for so long. On the other hand, even though old and experienced, nothing could prepare Shouzou for this moment, although he thought it could. Even miracles contain a dose of suffering. The flow of time is always cruel. In an act of desperation, Shouzou begs the heavens not to take away the love of his life from him. At that moment, a balance descends upon the earth and envelops the couple, while Mino notices a glow in the sanctuary. Shouzou is sucked into the hard-glass dream, with his wife sleeping in his arms. A voice that cannot be seen introduces itself as Takigami, the deity of this sanctuary. She promises to lend her power to fulfill the man's wish as gratitude for him and his wife having cleaned this sacred place that had long been abandoned. If it weren't for Ine and Shouzou, the deity would have already disappeared. However, she is just a small Tachigami from a remote rural town, unable to create life from void and extend the duration of a human being on Earth. So if Shouzou wants more days with his wife, he must reduce another person's lifespan. Without a second thought, the man takes half of his sand and gives it to Ine. Then she wakes up not knowing how long she slept, and Shouzou says it was just about 15 minutes, as if nothing had happened. Ine reveals that she dreamed her hourglass gained sand out of nowhere, and after that she stopped hearing that strange voice. Returning to the previous topic, Shouzou recalls that his wife mentioned having few days left, and she adds that it's better this way because that way they don't have to count how much life they have left for each other. To seal this agreement, they intertwine their pinky fingers while Shouzou reflects that Ine will kill him if she finds out what he did. Anyway, it will be worth it because then neither of them will have to go after the other. When the time comes, it will leave together. With that in mind, the elderly man contemplates the fireworks to capture as many beautiful scenes as he can. Meanwhile, Satoshi tells Shiori with a know-it-all air that a long time ago, near this sanctuary, there lived a very happy couple. In a certain year, a drought caused hunger and diseases that killed the people of the village one by one. This couple gave water, which was the most important thing in that context, to the sacred tree, but their wish was not granted, and they also died. A few days later, golden fruits sprouted from that tree, which cured diseases and satisfied the hunger of those condemned by the drought. According to legend, the wishing power of that couple still flows through this land to this day, even in modern times. Impatient with the story, Shiori turns her back and runs, while reflecting on how strange she has been feeling about wanting to be like her grandparents. Satoshi catches up with the girl with 2 chocolate bananas as an apology, and she accepts, lowering her tone a bit. A week later, Ine realizes she's still alive and starts crying because she was so scared. Despite accepting death, she couldn't bear to think of her husband alone. Faced with this, Shouzou hugs his wife and asserts that they need to live life as they always have, even if the day they both depart is tomorrow.
After some time, the couple was still going strong, and now the event of the moment was a Halloween party. Mino explained that it's when everyone dresses up as monsters and says, "trick or treat." Her granddaughter would love to see her grandparents participate in the event, assuring them that nowadays even adults get involved in everything. At the end of the month, the famous Western celebration begins in Japan. Mino dresses up as a witch and lends Shouda a costume from a friend who had a cosplay cafe at the cultural festival. Mino is eager to see what her grandparents will wear, so she wastes no time impressing them with her sensational witch costume. However, upon meeting the elderly couple, they are dressed so eerily that the girl couldn't resist and fainted on the spot. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, 2 men are discussing in a car whether this is where the mini truck everyone talks about appears. They heard that all the motorcycles in the area lost to it, earning it the nickname Demon of the Mini Truck of the Southern Mountains. However, the only vehicle of that type they found was an old thing that crawled like a snail on the road, so the yellow car overtakes it and the driver tosses a cigarette butt onto the road in front of an orchard, which angers the mini truck's driver. At the same time, Shiori wonders why she doesn't see her grandfather at home at this hour, and Ine explains that he spends the nights patrolling the nearby orchards to scare away apple thieves. Moreover, for some reason, since he started these patrols, Ine feels that the motorcycle gangs have also decreased in the area. On the road, the 2 men in the yellow car decide to head home, but a bright light appears behind them at high speed. It was that mini contraption that seemed like a turtle on the road, but now it proved to be a hare. Or rather, it seems to be the road demon, as the legend says. Faced with this, the skilled driver of the yellow car drifts to shake off the pursuer, but the adversary driver promises to punish those orchard destroyers, performing the same maneuver that placed places his vehicle close to his victim. Seeing up close the being holding the truck's steering wheel, there was no other explanation. It was the southern demon keeping up with the invaders, even as they pressed the accelerator to the floor. Terrified, the two men wonder how such a car could be so fast. Some time ago, the repair of Shouzou's car had just been completed. Tetsuji, the owner's trusted mechanic, took the liberty of tweaking the vehicle here and there, and now the mini truck could carry as many apple crates as the old farmer wanted. But there was a catch. One had to be careful with the speed or the car would tip over. Experienced Tetsuji used to work on cars whose engine roar would make eyes light up, but now he seemed stuck working on these little farm trucks. Anyway, whether the owner liked it or not, sometimes he would tune the cars at no extra cost to reminisce about the old days. What Tetsuji hardly knew was that this crazy boldness created the mini truck demon, which now corners the intruders in front of a dangerous curve. Betting everything, the invader drifts again, and Shouzou sees this maneuver as an opportunity to reduce acceleration, disappear from sight, and pretend that nothing ever happened, making it seem like the duo in the yellow car was hallucinating. In any case, the result is always the same. The unwanted visitors promise never to return to that area. The next day, a local news report covered the case of the highway ghost chasing two men down the road like a madman. Ine is scared of what it could be, while Shouzou pretends to agree. Later, Matsunosuke is on his land ready to teach people how to prevent animal damage to crops with an air gun. Of course, without shooting the animals, but being able to scare them away with the shot. The old ladies flock to the youngest and most handsome old man in the area to learn how to pull the trigger, so there goes Shouzou giving lessons on how to knock down beer cans. Since they had had a few days of lessons already, the ladies decide to give the teacher a demonstration, pretending that the middle can is a monkey, meaning only the surrounding cans should be hit. Then, as if they were experienced elite shooters, they take down the targets with mastery, making Matsunosuke start to think he's training some elite army platoon. His friend mentions that the animals have done a lot of damage to their crops, which is why they exude anger in their fingers. Later, under heavy rain, Mino and Shouta take shelter at the Yukamachi shrine. While the storm passes, Shouta lends his coat to the girl. Happy with her friend's gesture, Mino expresses how kind he is until a lightning strike hits the shrine's roof, causing Mino to hug the boy out of fright. After that, she tries to call her grandfather, but the phone has no signal. At that moment, Shouta and Mino look to the side and come face to face with an apparition of a young Shouzou and Ine Saitou, with the woman dripping wet from the rain. Just like Shouta, the man gives her his coat so she doesn't catch a cold. Meanwhile, the real characters of this apparition watch the rain pour down, making Shouzou reminisce about the old days, while Ine is more worried about the children in this weather. Speaking of which, the two kids try to talk to the illusions but can't, so they stop to listen to their conversation. Ine was sad because the people she lives with scolded her again, saying that if she continues her relationship with the Saitou boy, she will be dishonored. Similarly, yesterday Shouzou's father introduced the woman his son should marry upon discovering about Ine. For this reason, today might be the last day Shouzou can visit the woman he truly loves. Faced with the facts, Ine has a last-minute idea. If the man she loves' family discovers he is already tied to someone else, perhaps they will stop pushing him towards another. Mino immediately understands what her grandmother is talking about and makes an embarrassed but excited face, while Ine says that the one who acts first is the one who wins and pushes the man to the ground, who is sure he will be punished by the gods for desecrating the shrine with such shamelessness. Later, when they arrived home soaked and traumatized, the children were handed towels to take a bath and avoid catching a cold, until Mino decided to ask his grandmother if she used to visit the nearby shrine often. Upon hearing her affirmative answer, the girl quickly changed the subject and headed upstairs for a bath, while Ine felt anxious that her secret about Shouzou might have somehow been uncovered. After bathing, Mino asked if Shouta wouldn't do the same, but he preferred to wait until they returned home. Clearly, both were shaken by what they had seen earlier, and the young boy couldn't shake that image from his mind, even though he was beside Mino, causing considerable discomfort. Ine's words about who acts first wins echoed in the boy's mind, making him question if he should also be someone who takes initiative like she did. Nevertheless, he was sure that attempting something like that would only scare Mino, until he looked at her and saw that look of longing. One day, Ine confessed to Mino that she envied her generation because they were free to fall in love and be with whoever they wanted. In her grandmother's time, people generally didn't choose who they would marry. They say that things were better in the past, but she disagreed because there there are many things today that are better than they were in the past. For instance, when she was young, she had to defy her family to be with Mino's grandfather. For this reason, Ine would love for Mino to do what she feels like doing, enjoying the freedom she has. Remembering this, the girl mentioned the moment when the lightning struck and she hugged Shouzou to protect herself. The boy apologized as if he had crossed a line, but she made it clear that she was very happy in that moment. Almost as if repeating that moment, she rested her head on the boy's shoulder, making his heart race. Then she prepared to make a confession, but heard a noise outside and asked for a moment. Meanwhile, Shouzou tried to approach quietly to find out what was happening, but couldn't help making the old staircase creak. Seeing this, Mino confronted the young man and asked what he was trying to do. Shortly after, Mino was inside the room telling Shouzou they could talk later, while her grandmother claimed they were watching a ninja movie and her grandfather gave up pretending and begged to come in. Meanwhile, at a station, the train conductor alerted a woman that they had reached the last stop. Distracted, the woman hadn't realized, but the conductor was kind and even offered to carry her bags to the station entrance as she was the only passenger. The woman was startled by this information as she was used to seeing the train full all day long in the past. The conductor explained that now it's much more common for people to travel by car, and seizing the opportunity, he confessed that it's painful to feel like you're becoming outdated, useless. A day later at the same station, the conductor welcomed several ladies at once, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Curious, he asked where they were going, and they informed him they had decided to take the train to go for a ride and see other places because Mrs. Ine invited them to a women's meeting near the station. Speaking of her, Ine appeared after her friends, and as she entered the car, she commented to the conductor that this town still has plenty of life and needs him. Some time later, the dynamic duo from Minaminachi were out for a stroll despite the heavy snowfall in the area. To make matters worse, they spotted a small traffic jam up ahead. Shouzou figured the driver ahead was afraid of the blizzard, so he offered to show everyone that recklessness is the solution to traffic problems. Up front, the driver was trembling in fear of pressing the accelerator, unable to see a hand in front of his face. Suddenly, a small truck arrived with its headlights on high beam, illuminating the path like a savior. Proudly, Ine reflected that her husband has been navigating these snowy roads for over 60 years, and even though it's difficult to see, the light texture of the snow tells him whether he's on the road or not. In no time, the fearful man was guided into town and thanked his great hero of the day, the driver of the small truck. The next day, speaking of heroes, he forgot to put the car in the garage, and now the vehicle has a beautiful coat of snow. Shortly after, Ine grabbed her pickaxe to clear some ice from the road, and despite the blizzard, it seemed warm enough to make her sweat. So she took off one of the coats she was wearing. Curiously, she remembered when she was still elderly how she felt her feet and hands colder each year. Now young and strong again, she could feel the warmth taking over her body so much so that she removed another layer of clothing. Remembering how his wife with Shouzou came in from outside with warm gloves and socks to warm her up, only to find Ine dripping with sweat and without any coat on. A few days before the New Year's Eve, the Saitou family begins their usual preparations to welcome their relatives. It's a lot for Shouzou and Ine to handle on their own, so their eldest son comes over with his wife to help out. Yoshiaki, with a massive sledgehammer in hand, tries to do the heavy lifting by himself despite his wife's warnings that he's not as young as he used to be. Stubborn as ever, he swings the hammer without considering the consequences, and his back gives out on the very first swing. His father steps in, telling him to step aside because, according to the old man, Yoshiaki is just trying to show off for his wife and should leave this kind of work to those who are more capable like him. Admitting his failure, Yoshiaki acknowledges the strength of his parents, who despite their age still managed to handle so much, working day in and day out in the orchard. Speaking of which, Shouzou and Ine have been working together for so long that they seem like two machines programmed to complement each other perfectly. The old man never misses an opportunity to tease his son, bragging to Kid that he's much better than her husband. But Shouzou's skills don't stop there. Fascinated by the snowman her grandfather built, Mino makes sure everyone knows how amazing he is, and her words echo in the old man's head like they were spoken by angels. The next day, rejuvenated, he builds a giant snow bear, becoming increasingly smug, claiming it's nothing for him. Then he asks Kusuke, his youngest grandson, who his favorite character is, and Mino replies that it's the Black Phoenix dragon from a card game. Studying every detail of the creature, Shouzou finds a challenge worthy of his talent. Hours later, the kids arrive at their grandfather's house, and see the snow dragon in the yard, driving little Kusuke wild with excitement at seeing the black phoenix in front of him. Meanwhile, Ine welcomes other arriving family members, including her sister and Takahiro, her second son. Kusuke quickly calls Shiori to join him and Mino in playing with Mrs. Tsuru watching over them. Shiori asks her grandmother if she's cold, but she can't respond due to her advanced age. Shiori has always dealt with her grandmother like this, so she's used to it, even if she has no idea what Tsuru is thinking. Inside Tsuru's mind, she played with the same cards her grandchildren now hold her mother, praising her intelligence and speed at winning the game. The smile of the young girl who has now lived most of her life shines through. Suddenly, the elderly woman stands up and sits to join the game, where one person reads a poem and the others must find the card with the corresponding poetry. Shiori recites the following verses. I will soon depart and leave this world behind. Will the memory of our last meeting be carried with me? As soon as the girl finishes the poem, Tsuru slaps the correct card with incredible speed, leaving the children in awe. By doing so, she channels her inner child, hoping for the warm praises of her beloved mother. Later, Kusuke tries to convince Ine that his older sister has the reflexes of a snake, but naturally she doesn't believe him. Later, after everyone finishes the New Year's feast, Shouzou notices his little grandson acting differently. Kusuke offers to massage his grandfather's shoulders, which surprises his father since the boy has never done that before. Then the little one massages his grandmother and even puts Mino in line. Suspicious Shiori starts to wonder what this kid is up to with his good boy act. At that moment, Shouzou gives Shiori a New Year's money gift to spend on whatever she likes, prompting the boy to try his luck with his grandfather for some cash too. However, when he receives 500 yen and a book gift certificate, he realizes that his plan to butter up his grandparents didn't work out as planned. On New Year's Eve, the kids play Danger in the Rice Field 3, while the men drink sake and the women have their own girls' club. Kaoru Shiori's mother confides that she's been tough on her daughter regarding her studies, creating a distance between them that she doesn't know how to bridge. Ine advises that in such moments, it's even more important to treat children with kindness. For example, when Takahiro was preparing for college entrance exams, Ine was naturally nervous, but the boy understood that her concern was as a mother, and that all the strictness had a purpose, not just unwarranted strictness. With this, Ine comments that surely Shiori understands this about her mother too. Kaoru breaks down in tears at the comforting words, and Ine's daughter-in-law takes the opportunity to ask for advice as well. She explains that at her job as a nurse, a patient is always bossy and rude, ordering her around disrespectfully. The girl wants to know what Ine would do in her place. The experienced grandmother advises her to be more assertive and confident, making it clear to the patient that it's not his home to be giving orders, and that standing up for oneself is the way to set limits on a rude old man. The young woman also starts crying at this advice. Finally, Ine looks at all the women at the table and delivers a final saying, noting that mothers are always seen as strong, but everyone cries, sometimes turning the table into a sobfest. Meanwhile, Shouzou, electrified, asks his wife where the bottle opener is, only to see the women all around Ine as if she were the Virgin Mary herself. Afterwards, as usual, the most talked about couple in town received the ton of New Year cards they always get every year, and Shiori is always overwhelmed by the pile. This time 400 cards were laid out on the table, including one from Shouzou's fan club asking him to teach everyone how to play gateball next year. Another message was from Haisuke Shouta's grandfather, saying he won't rest in peace until he gets to hold a great-grandchild in his arms. In response, the couple sent out a photo of themselves as elderly and another as young, wishing for an even better year ahead. Besides that, the sensational couple couldn't stop answering phone calls from the townsfolk. With the end of all the festivities, the family finally leaves the grandparents' house, although Kusuke puts up some resistance by clinging to Grandpa, not wanting to leave. So his mother uses the trick of showing his father, who looks just like Grandpa did when he was young, to convince the little guy to hit the road. However, the strategy doesn't work, so they resort to Mr. Bear, who will get in that car and travel too. Besides that, Shouzou assures him he'll see the kid again soon, and that he'll always be by his side, so there's no need to cry. As a promise, he extends his pinky finger to the boy, who returns the gesture and trusts his grandfather. However, when the little boy leaves, it's the old man who breaks down in tears. The next day, Shouzou and Ine return to their usual lives, and today was supposed to be the day Mino and Shouta would come to the orchard. When they arrive, they learn how to tend the field, and Shouzou praises the young man's quick learning. learning. Modestly, Shouzou replies that he still has much to learn. After all, he pruned only one tree when the experienced farmer pruned absolutely all of them, so there's still a long learning journey ahead. Playfully, the old man pats Shouzou's back hard and asks how things are going between him and Mino. Embarrassed, he replies that things are going well, while Shouzou mentions that Shouzou's grandfather keeps nagging about when they'll get married. On the other side, Ine asks Mino if it's really okay to help in the orchard on a school-free day, and the girl recalls that she promised to learn a lot to take care of the apple tree she planted in the best possible way. Ine teases her, saying she actually wants to spend more time with Shouzou, but Mino assures her it's not true, also feeling awkward. Speaking of which, Shouzou asks Mino to help with some branches, so she asks him not to call her by her first name in front of his grandparents, as she had already mentioned, until Shouzou appears to leave some branches in a part of the orchard with the two young people. As he said this, Shouzou was acting strangely, although he promises it's nothing. Soon the elderly couple takes a break, while the younger ones continue working, and the two youngsters begin to understand each other better to work as a team. Watching the scene with an affectionate expression, Shouzou calls his wife for a walk to Mount Iwaki, which according to him isn't as beautiful as his wife, making her laugh at the cheesy pickup line. Later, the two sit together and enjoy the afternoon in each other's company. The weather was so nice that they began to feel sleepy, and changing the subject, they both celebrate Shiori's effort to enter the medical department through Takahashi's private lessons. In fact, they heard that the Takahashi family always talks about Shiori when they go to Takahiro's clinic, so it becomes more of a gossip session than a medical consultation. So to strengthen the bonds between the two families even more, Ine left a basket of apples at their door, and Shouzou finds humor in his wife's habit of leaving things for others without notice. Moreover, Ine and Shouzou like to remember that Akemi's children have all gone their separate ways, leaving her more free than ever to do as she pleases. Also, Yoshiaki has found another place to work and seems excited about it. Obviously, no one knows what tomorrow will bring, but things seem to be heading in a good direction so far. Although the future is uncertain, the couple is absolutely sure that the children will be fine too. Next week, Ine and Shouzou will go to the gateball tournament and have trained so much with Matsunosuke that they're sure they'll beat Minaminachi. During the summer vacation, Akemi and the others will come to visit them, with little Kusuke having grown even more. Together, they will all set off fireworks. Speaking of fireworks and New Year's, Shouzou asks his wife what wish she would like to see fulfilled if she could make one. So she thinks about what to say and concludes that her wish has already come true. Likewise, her husband agrees. Suddenly, we see the aged appearance of the couple again as they decide what they will do tomorrow. At the same time, the sand in the hourglass is running out in the spiritual plane, so memories of experiences, people, and places manifest in their minds with each important character who passed through the lives of Ine and Shouzou Saitou, who join hands. Sometime later, Mino arrives with lunch in a lunchbox, with Shouzou starving right behind her. She sees the grandparents sitting down and worries that they might catch a cold, but little did she know they were far from being in any trouble. 50 years later, Shouzou rushes to call his wife Mino to take a look at the tree they planted when they were still in school. Marked with the same red ribbon as always, the apple tree displayed a beautiful golden apple on one of its branches, so old Shouzou asks if they should place that fruit on the altar, while Mino is certain it would be a waste to simply leave it there. Thinking about it, the two pause for a moment and decide to taste the golden apple.